Imagine 87.5% of London could be taken out by bread, indecisiveness, and interconnected roofs, among other things. Well, this actually happened 350 years ago during the Great Fire of London, which took out 7/8 of homes in London. You're watching Unusual Answers, and today is a thunderous night, as you can no doubt hear behind me. And this inspires conversation between me and Shoria about the Great Fire of London, the opposite of thunderstorms, or something along those lines.
Our story starts late one night. The moon was shining brightly into the sky, a little past midnight. The king's baker, Thomas Farriner, was getting ready for bed and shutting down the bakery, turning off all the stoves and making sure everything was put away neatly. The streets were quiet, a slight wind picking up in the distance. A normal night in London, or so it seemed.
While under the impression everything was alright, the Fariners and the assistant went to sleep. The daughter of the Fariners was the last to go to sleep, and the later report said everything was perfectly normal. Yet, unbeknownst to them, a stray, smoldering ember from the stove hit some firewood next to the oven. This quickly ignited the entire house and awoke the baker, who fled with his family, and a lone servant too. The time was 3 a.m. Unfortunately, one assistant was burnt alive, becoming our first victim of what would become the Great Fire of London, going down into history books.
Whilst the bakery went up in flames, a strong gust of wind pushed the fire to Star Inn, where many bunches of straw and hay were kept, further fueling the fire. After moving closer to a bunch of warehouses filled with coal or wax, or oil, which made a bigger base from which these fires could move. It was something like compounding. The more fire there was to start, the more the fire could spread, faster.
Thatched roofs are made from straw and air pockets. This makes them light, natural insulators that block out rain. Good for London, and also good for the flimsy homes of the time. Win-win, right? The roof is literally made of dry vegetation, and that doesn't help as something that's avoided for fire protection today, but at the time it seemed like a great idea.
On top of the thatched roofs being ideal for fires, the homes were made out of straw, wattle, daub, and cob, and sometimes wood. They sound like characters in an old play. Moving onwards though. Straw was mostly used for insulation, while wattle was used to weave wood strips together, while daub was a sticky material that was made out of things like soil, clay, sand, and more straw. Cob is like wattle and daub and is just made out of other things. It has the same purpose. Lastly, there were logs, which were vital for buildings in the Middle Age for their framing. Because it was really expensive to have wood, it wasn't really used for everything though, and it definitely wasn't the entire house. The important part is to realize that almost all of this is flammable, and the windy conditions that were already there made the straw light up very quickly.
Wattle and Daub may be great fire hazards, but another problem was that there was no fire department at all. On top of that, people were so used to fires and they were so used to not worrying about it at all. This hurt because the circumstances were such that the complacency was compounded by things like wind and a dry summer, which led to fire spreading. On top of that, the time of the fire was at 3 a.m., and this isn't exactly the time people in London were having their wits about them and doing things outside, unlike Shoria here, holding a Nerf gun to my head so I can get the act right.
As the inferno raged on, whilst there was no fire brigade, the local Londoners helped to fight the flames and make fire breaks, which involved demolishing houses, thus the fire would stop moving through. Fortunately, the wind started to die down and our local heroes were able to gain control of the fire and put it out. And this helped prevent London from being burnt down completely.
The Great Fire was blamed on a lot of things. For starters, it was blamed on an innocent person named Robert Hubert, who, other than having an absolutely fantabulous name, admitted to throwing a fireball, like this, that started the blaze. It turned out at the time he was away at sea, which made it kind of impossible for him to have done. I mean, he could have had a henchman that threw some embers near a bakery and framed the baker, and then started a massive fire that killed like a lot of London and caused a lot of, but I think it's unlikely. Okay? Unfortunately, he was tried and hanged much sooner than that became apparent. And he probably just confessed while caving to pressure from investigators. Unfortunately, he was killed on October 27th, 1666. A lot of others were also blamed, because it was believed to be religious terrorism, if you will. This made the people of Catholic faith targets, even though they were overseas. Another group that was blamed was the Dutch. This, however, makes more sense than the others, as England was at war with the Dutch a few years, or a year earlier actually. Lastly, some people blamed it on God. The actual person responsible was probably the bakery, or the owner of the bakery we talked about earlier, Thomas Farriner. In total, 6 deaths have been confirmed.
The real damages other than the deaths were in the price. The cost the country paid adjusted for inflation was something like just under $4 billion, or like the GDP of Burundi today, which has a population of 12 million people. Point is, it was a lot of money.
As with any disaster, restoration is always going to be required in the aftermath. And in this case, it was a 30-year period of rebuilding that ended up including the bubonic plague. This is controversial though. Some people believe that the fire ended the plague, but others believe that that's false, and that there are cases that happened after 1666. Again, this is controversial, but one thing is for sure, that it did end up slowing or killing it down for sure. A famous cathedral known as St. Paul's was not restored until 1711. That's a really long time, and 9,000 other houses were built up until that point, because a lot of them burnt down.
I would like to say that the human race has improved at building homes that are resistant to fires, and I would like to say that nothing like this could ever happen again. However, humans make mistakes and it'll probably happen again. Some things that have improved, however, in the modern days are safety mechanisms. These include things like sprinkler systems, fire extinguishers, and fire doors. Another thing is now there are dedicated fire departments in more parts of the world, which help make it much harder that unfortunate timing, like 3 a.m. fires, could make a fire much more deadly as there are people on call waiting for it. On the whole, people are more afraid and less used to fires, which is good at keeping people safe. The Great Fire of London was a tragedy that we will remember forever and will always remain in our hearts. May everyone who died and fought in this tragedy rest in peace. We must also grow and learn from our past mistakes to make sure that this disaster will never be repeated. You've been watching Unusual Answers, and we hope you've had a fantabulous 24 hours.